For things like the lists, you generally want to throw in to let your typesetter know, like, yes, bullets should be on this list of some kind. Otherwise, I've seen typesetters just not put the bullets in. And to their credit, they don't want to change what you wrote, so be as clear as possible. In the fourth column, that's where I normally have an additional comments column, and that's for things like I'm writing a line, or I'm translating it, and I know it can sound better than this. I know this isn't it. So I might call out to my proofreader specifically like, hi, this line, this is what it says, but can you think of a better way to say that? Or can you think of a better sound effects for this? Like I've used a squishy sound effect, like there's 4 squish sound effects, and I've come up with 3 onomatopoeias for squish, and I need a 4th. Please help proofreader. So that comments column is where I can call that out. Or if I want to tell the typesetter that I'm deeply sorry for the 20-something sound effects they're going to have to fit into something, I can apologize to my typesetter in advance. Another brief comment about a literal translation versus a localization, because a lot of the argument I get, or that I see in common discourse from people who don't work in localization is, oh my God, you translated that wrong. It's literally this. You left out these 3 words. How could you have done that? So I have here an example of pretty close to a machine translation. I've cleaned this up as much as I can, but I've left it also as literal as I can. And then I have a localized translation. So you can see some things are mostly okay, like down here in the last panel, these 2 lines are pretty similar. I think it's best if you send her things by message. That ends up okay. But then you've got stuff up here like, is there something that you don't understand versus did you have a question? So, hyphenation is a thing that you just have to accept is going to happen, but you do want it to be as little as possible. So yes, a localizer would know, oh, we can make our words a little bit shorter and avoid some of these hyphens. Obviously, understand and question are going to be too long, but you do what you do. You've also got things like, yes, this is literally another internal message has arrived. No one speaks like that, especially not to themselves in their head. So you smooth that over. You've also got some set phrases like literally that phrase is, when I thought about it, I understood. No. So it's more like, yeah, I bet I figured it out on my own. Not gonna bother you. So yes, this is why you want a proper localization company looking at your stuff, and why I think ChatGPT is not taking over the manga business anytime in the near future. Oh, and I just realized like all my stuff is showing. All right, the awkward topic in the room surrounding a lot of stuff in both the manga and anime industry is payment. And yes, in general, I would agree that both industries could pay better than they do. It is what you do. I used to work in video games as well. We call it the video game industry tax. Same deal applies here. Payment is generally done for manga by the page. I have seen other methods, but not as common. You generally don't see by the word in manga translation specifically, whereas you might see it in more business Japanese translation. Because you've got issues like, okay, there's a verb here with like 3 different Japanese verb endings thrown onto it. In Japanese, that's 1 word. But in English, that might take 8 words to convey the idea. So if you're paying by the word, which one of those are you using? And which one of those is fair? So generally things even out if you go by the page. I've seen rates varying from $1.20 per page is the lowest I have personally seen. I've heard rumors of worse. I can't imagine worse. Have you seen actually worse?
Yes, I was offered one time $1 a page to letter. I was like, oh no.
Not for the amount of time that takes. So yes, I've personally never been offered less than $1.20. 20 is also on the extreme end. I have been offered 20 for a page with roughly 6 paragraphs of text condensed into 1 page of manga, and it's some villain's philosophical statement on the universe. So a lot of technical terms and a lot of text. And it was also like a full color thing. It had lots of complex, it was a whole deal. Again, 120 isn't normal and 20 isn't normal. You're probably looking for translation. I'd say the actual low end is about $2 a page, and high end is typically like $5-ish depending on the page. It's really hard to say because it's kind of all over the place. The amount that you get paid will vary depending on your publisher. like Amimadu, for example, works a lot with webcomics. So there's just not as much money in that market by its nature because people are paying 90 cents to read a chapter. Amimadu's not swimming in money, so they're going to pay on the low end. Whereas you've got people like Viz or Shonen Jump, they are swimming in the money, so they can pay you a little bit more and also therefore have higher standards. You've got the difficulty of the page. Like I said, if you're looking at 7 paragraphs, you're probably going to get paid more for that page. Your experience as a translator will also, just like any other job, if you walk in with more experience, you can negotiate for a higher rate. You've also just got the current market rates. That can determine things like right now the yen is terrible. I see my paycheck and I cry every month at what could have been and what I have lost because I get paid in yen. Whether or not you find a rate personally acceptable, and this is a lot of people get angry over this too, is what your personal translation rate is. In general, I think that for a beginner, you should be able to translate at about 8 pages per hour. That's a fairly slow rate, I would say, but it's still fast enough that you could make reasonable money doing this for the amount of time you're putting in. I once read someone online complaining that they had to leave the manga translation industry after a month because the publisher wanted them to do 3 chapters a month, and it was so unreasonable, and it's so demanding, and this industry's broken, and I want you to know that I translate on average 2 chapters a day. So reading that person's entire soliloquy about how terrible they were treated was kind of funny. So yes, bear that in mind when talking about rates. I had a friend look into proofreading somewhat recently, and when I told them what that particular company's rate was, which was for that type of proofreading, it was 20 cents per page. That sounds really bad, right? But if I also word it in a slightly different way that is also true, I did proofreading last month, and when I looked at my paycheck, I got $150 for 3 hours of work. That is still at 20 cents a page, but I can proofread pretty fast. I'm a native English speaker, so depending on how you look at it is what's going to determine your happiness about a given rate most of the time. On a completely different topic, I simply had space on this slide to put it in. The tools I use the most. Obviously, I use a lot of Excel or Word. You can use OpenOffice or numbers, pages, what have you, but that's what you're going to be typing in. I use a lot of my handy-dandy dictionary on my iPhone for when the mangaka has decided to write a word in kanji that is never written in kanji, but they did it to be cute and styling. So I get to use a lot of that to hand draw and look up what a kanji is. I use a lot of Jaded Network, which I think I can pull up here. Ignore that I was looking up how to mirror my iPad screen. So yes, the Jaded Network is a handy database for sound effects in Japanese and what they might mean in English. It doesn't have every sound effect in the universe, but it saves me a lot of time, especially when I'm trying to think of the 4th word for a squish that I haven't come up with yet. I also use a lot of websites like, ignore all the ads, Weblio and DMM come up a lot, where let's say that there's a slang word or some recent hip term with the 20-somethings that I'm too old to know. Websites like this are meant for native Japanese speakers learning English, but I can then use it to see like, oh, what's a good way of saying this in English that might sound natural? And it'll have plenty of example sentences to help me out so I can figure out the right context, stuff like that. Because when you're making mistakes as a translator, that's one of the more common ones you can do, is you mistranslate a slang or a turn of phrase, or you missed a nuance that was there and now people are mad at you. Also, I do use DeepL and ChatGPT on occasion. Hear me out. DeepL I use for when there's a sentence that spans 4 speech bubbles. And at the end of the day, I'm going to have to also split mine into 4 speech bubbles, but I'm having a hard time visualizing, like, okay, because the sentence order is different in Japanese and English. Where do I want to break this up? How do I want this to flow? If I throw the sentence in DeepL, I can see it in front of me and be like, okay, here, here, here. Okay, we're good. So DeepL is useful for that. And ChatGPT is another resource. Sometimes it can be faster than using Weblio or DMM or some of those sites. If I throw into it, hey ChatGPT, what does it mean to call someone a cheese gyudon? And ChatGPT will spit out a full paragraph on what it means to call someone a cheese gyudon. It's also useful for sound effects a lot of the time. It will almost never spit out an onomatopoeia for you, but it will say like, oh, this is the sound of a squish, but like a soft squish, not a wet squish. And it's like, ah, Thank you, ChatGPT. I can figure it out from there. Again, I would never, ever use it as a translation. All right, next step, and is probably the most optional step in this entire process, is script proofreading. So if you want to have proofreading done before something is typeset, this can save you a lot of time if you anticipate mistakes being made. The most common time I see this is if you've got a translator who is a great translator and has really accurate translations, good style, all that, but let's say that they're not a native English speaker. They may be a native Japanese speaker, for example. So you've got a lot of like really minor, small English mistakes. Like one I saw, I think 2 days ago, was they translated a title as like, "The person I used to loved." And it's like, okay, I understand exactly how that mistake was made, a person I used to love. But it's just small stuff like that that like, you can't let that go in the published version, but it's also not enough to fire your translator over, right? Like you don't want to lose good talent over that. So you might throw on a script just so that the typesetter doesn't then have to go in and change 24 pages of itty-bitty, nitty-gritty mistakes. So you can just save some time with some script PR. The best way to do this, I have my nice 36-inch monitor. I love it. I put up the original manga on one side, the original Japanese, and then I've got the script on the other. That way I can take a look and figure out nuance of the scene. For example, I had one recently where it was a romantic scene and this couple's making out, and the guy's being very passionate and kissing her very passionately, and the girl is thinking to herself like, oh my gosh, it's so intense, I can't catch my breath. And then she stops him like, "Show," or whatever his name was, like, "Show, I can't breathe," trying to indicate how this moment is. The translator had translated that scene as her thinking to herself, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe, he's too forceful, show, please stop." And it's like, no, that nuance, that's way different. That's a different scene altogether right there. That consent's not there. That's not what we're doing here. So I had to be like, hey, if you look at the pictures of these two people, they both look happy and good to be in this situation. Could we maybe change the phrasing to something more romantic? All right, let me take a quick swig. Oh, is this working now? Ah! I'm sorry, I've been doing this whole thing. Now I can stop yelling, thank God. All right, next step, typesetting and lettering, and I will definitely invite you to throw in afterwards because I don't do this step at all. I started the typesetting test for a company and I made it 30 minutes in and decided I was really bored and I didn't want to do this. I'm going to be very honest, power to you. This is oftentimes the same person as whoever cleaned it, but not always. Depends on your company and how quickly you're trying to throw stuff out the door and all that. But if it's the same person as your cleaner, let's say if your cleaner did have to remove sound effects, they know that they removed the sound effect there and they're more likely to know to put it back in so that that mistake doesn't get made. They need to look at the script, which has hopefully been laid out very clearly for them, and they can put stuff in the right place. Sometimes your client or your publisher will specify the fonts you need to use in each situation. Sometimes they won't. Oftentimes your localization company will basically have a font bank that you can use because you may not have the commercial rights to whatever font is on your computer, so you've got to be a little careful about just throwing in random fonts, again, depending on your publisher. So you'll typically have a lot of stuff made available to you by your company. You don't have to go out and buy $500 worth of fonts. General rules, and I've not necessarily done the greatest job on this page, but I'm not a typesetter. Also, I should say, I'm using the words typesetter and letterer kind of interchangeably. Different companies will use different words, just depending. I generally, in my opinion, it's a sign of how American a company is. The more American they are, the more likely they are to use letterer, and the more Japanese they are, the more likely they are to use typesetting. That's just the trend I've noticed. So you generally want to keep the speech centered both horizontally and vertically within the bubble, and you kind of want the boxes of text to be well-rounded. You don't want the reader's eye to have to go like left, right, left, left. You want it to be kind of a smooth reading process as much as you can. You want your text to be legible, so like certain fonts, if you've then shrunk them down to become side text, maybe they're no longer legible, some of those handwriting fonts, and you got to make a change. So intelligent font choice for legibility. You don't want to change words or formatting and stuff from the translator without asking, because sometimes, like, I've made a spelling error on purpose because it's what the character did, and the typesetter will go, oh, I fixed that for you. Thank you, but no, that was the joke. Please put it back. I appreciate everything you're doing, but please put it back. Yes, and yes, that's the other reason I have the comments column is to flag, I've done something weird here. I know. You also want to follow the client style guide. Most of the time, clients will have both a translation style guide with rules for people like me and a separate typesetting style guide for rules for letterers, which includes things like where do they want the line breaks in a word. Generally, this would be done like on the syllable or something like that to make it easier to read. How much can you add a white blur around the text if you've got text on a background to make it more legible, stuff like that. You've got sound effect formatting. Oftentimes, you've got Japanese sound effects will kind of span the panel and like go around a character's head. Some companies do want you to do the same thing. Some want you to keep it solely on the one side, regardless of what the Japanese does, all that. And then at the end, you're also going to submit both a TIFF, or probably just a TIFF, probably not your PSD, because again, server file sizes don't want to handle a ton of PSDs. But you'll want the layered TIFF, as well as probably a PDF. For those of us proofreading, it's a lot easier to comment on a PDF than to go through all of your 20, 30 TIFF files and make comments. All right, that's all I had. Did you want to throw in anything else on typesetting lettering? Sorry to put you on the spot. Oh yeah, and you've got to like warp the text to actually follow perspective, yeah. That's a good way to put it, thank you. Good, thank you. Because yeah, those are details that obviously I don't work with, so thank you very much. All right, typeset proofreading is a step that will always happen regardless, because this is your quality assurance, your quality check. This is often, if you had a first round of proofreading, this will likely be a different person, because you kind of want someone with fresh eyes on it who hasn't read the same line 5 times over, so they can easily spot like, what you just said is kind of weird. No, don't say it like that. General rules are still the same as before. You want to check for spelling mistakes. They're also checking the typesetting, so are there missing sound effects? Is a bit of text maybe too close to the end of a bubble and you've got the lines are kind of touching? You don't want that. Anything like that. They're also checking for natural English. This is kind of a controversial thing where you'll get like, you can't just tell someone like, well, I would say it like this, so you need to change your translation. And you get to have a slight argument over, okay, do I want to die on this hill or not? Or do I just say, okay, fine, if you think that sounds better, sure, it makes no difference to the translation, I don't care. They're also checking for style guide compliance. Did you use hyphens or ellipses where you're supposed to is probably the most headache-inducing one I deal with on a standard basis. Generally, when I'm proofreading, I have a 3-step approach. I find that this is the quickest way to actually go through it and get the most done while still catching the most errors that I possibly can. I will first move a PDF onto my iPad and open it in GoodNotes and then go through like I was checking a student's essay or something with my Apple Pencil and literally just mark it up, and I'll mark, okay, you need to remove that word, there's a missing thing here, this text looks, that sounds kind of weird, let me put a question mark next to it, I want to check the Japanese and make sure that that's what was being said, that sort of thing. Then I'll return to my desktop with my nice shiny giant monitor and put up the original Japanese next to the typesetting and go through, and now I'm checking for like, okay, missing sound effects, anything misspelled. I can go through the Japanese and be like, that translation, Oh, that is what that line was in Japanese. Huh. Okay, that's just badly written by the original Japanese author. There's nothing I can do to save you from that. Go for it. That's the best you can work. And then step 3, I'll often go through just one final time, at least just skimming. That's where I catch the most spelling mistakes or anything like that, or just anything that kind of jumps out to me on the final time. Generally, I can proofread a 24-page chapter in about 10 minutes, maybe less, depending on the chapter. All right, translator check is kind of the next step of proofreading. This is the last chance I will get to see the chapter before it goes off to the client, most likely. This is where I get to respond to any comments from proofreading, either accepting or rejecting. Accepting is a lot easier than rejecting because if I reject a comment, I still have to leave a reply saying why I've rejected you. I can't just be like, no, because that's kind of rude and also not helpful to the proofreader to get better. Like I translated a joke. It's a guy and a girl have just had a baby, and the guy's trying to get handsy with her, and she's like, oh my God, no, the baby's gonna wake up, and she literally shoves him away and like knocks him over and goes to get this crying baby. And he's like, wow, you've gotten really tough. Huh? What'd you say? No, nothing at all, don't worry. And my proofreader came back going, I think that line, instead of tough, it needs to be strong-willed, because tough is kind of an insult. Yes, I know tough is an insult. That's the joke, because she shoves him physically and knocks him over, and then when she asks him to repeat it, he won't repeat it because it is kind of a mean thing to say, and he's not going to say that to his wife that just gave birth. So that's the joke. Welcome to the joke, proofreader. Please leave this as is. But that takes me a lot longer to type out than just saying, please make this change typesetter. So yes, be careful what you're rejecting, but also feel confident if you need to reject it. Just choose what hill you're going to die on and what you're not. I also reread it as a translator because that's the first time I've seen it typeset, and I'll sometimes catch like, oh no, maybe I wasn't clear and my typesetter has swapped these 2 bubbles around. Okay, let me tell them to fix that. Oh, there's a sound effect missing here, blah, blah, blah. I'll typically have my typesetter will be very nice and ping me while they're typesetting like, hey, you missed something. And because they've already got the page open, and that's a lot easier for everyone if I just ping back with an answer. And then I send my translator feedback to the proofreader. Proofreader and the typesetter then basically get to go back and forth until it's done. Generally, by this point in time, the typesetters looked at it, the proofreaders looked at it, the translators looked at it, the typesetters looked at it again, and then the proofreader's going to check the typesetting change. By that point in time, most chapters are okay. So generally, the proofreading can stop there, but it can go in a cycle until it's either done or a deadline has been hit. And now the translator gets to go to sleep until the next cycle. All right, I have made, I believe, 6 mistakes in this typesetting test. So you need to look at our general typesetting principles, as well as the English being used, the fonts, any of that. So who can tell me what mistakes I've made on this page? Feel free to get closer if you need to see. Yes, that's just straight up missing a label. That's real bad. Yes. Mm-hmm. So in that case, this is actually more a problem of me using PowerPoint to typeset as opposed to Photoshop. It's actually because that side text, it's a little bit different and is allowed to kind of clip into the art if that's where it was sitting. In the original Japanese, it's a little off to his head, so you might want to keep that one to the side. The extra gray thing around it is a PowerPoint problem, not a typesetting problem, but potentially good call. Yes. Yes, I've left off the side text next to, well, excuse me. So yes, also bad. Any other catches or thoughts? Mm-hmm. That's also, again, kind of a PowerPoint typesetting issue. That gray border shouldn't really be there. Yes, it is a little bit too close to the speech. Yes, that's in panel 1 that I worry about your futures is not vertically centered within the bubble. Yes. Yes. Yes, I didn't call that out specifically, but yes, because I use 3 different fonts and I didn't set any of their kernings, the kerning is all over the place. All right, so the first one was called out. That one's not vertically centered. I worry about your futures. Needs to get bumped up a little bit. Yishtola is also missing punctuation on the end of it. All English lines need punctuation unless it's a sound effect. So that needs an exclamation point thrown on the end of it. In general, this font choice is bad. And look at that space between the Y apostrophe and Stola. Gross, ew, bad, and also just a really gross, goofy font. Should probably change the font. Or you can mess with the leading, but in general, also that font's just kind of ugly. I don't like it. I misspelled school. That's a U instead of an O, which may be difficult to see in an audience, I'll grant you. We've also got, that's kind of a bad word split on high schoolers because it's not done on the syllable. It should probably be split after the L, school-ers, just to make things easier to read. And then, yes, most obviously, I just straight up didn't put in a line. I also forgot to call out that, yes, I'd removed the side text line too. I'd forgotten that I also made that mistake. All right, typesetting fixes is pretty straightforward. This is where your poor typesetter has to go through to all of their Photoshop files, which they hopefully have good layer management on and have clearly labeled them so they know where to make changes, and make all of these changes. This is obviously more time consuming than if you'd caught it earlier in the process. I apologize to all typesetters. Once it's deemed complete, the typesetter can upload a final PDF and it will kind of get amassed. Generally by the company, they'll get a publisher's requests for an entire month. All of that month's chapters will kind of be bundled together in one zip file and sent over to Japan for the publisher's final check. Then you get client corrections. This only happens, again, if you're not working in-house, like if you're translating for Kodansha in-house in America, your client corrections are already there within your company. It's not getting sent anywhere else. If you're working for kind of a third-party localizer like Animaru, for example, you will have to go through client corrections. They will go through and find anything that doesn't match their style guide or make arbitrary word changes. You pretty much always have to make these changes whether or not you agree with them because they're what the client said. You are allowed to dispute. For example, if something is straight up wrong, like I saw one recently where it was like, you know, whose bag is this? Where the translator had put in correctly, W-H-O-S-E, whose bag is this? Whereas the client came back and said, no, unnatural English, W-H-O apostrophe S, who is bag is this? So you've got to go back and go, no, don't do that. So yes, you can fight back, but in general, unless it's a mistake like that, you just kind of suck it up and do it. However, this can be a problem. If the number of mistakes you make is too high, this can have some pretty bad ramifications. It could mean that you, as a translator, get kicked, or possibly the entire team who touched that particular series gets kicked, depending on how widespread the mistakes are and if they can pinpoint a problem. Typically this doesn't happen after like one chapter, but if it's been going on for a few chapters, you're probably looking at an emergency staff switch. And if you have enough series done by a particular localization company with a client that just have enough mistakes, the publisher may just drop that localization company and now everyone's jobs have been compromised. Congrats. So generally, we want to avoid any and all mistakes being shown to the client if possible. I have only ever had one chapter come back with no client comments, though, in like, I don't know how many hundreds of chapters I've translated. Only one has ever come back with no comments. So generally, you want to aim for less than 5, I think is the safest route, because there's always going to be a we'd prefer if you use this wording. But if you have things like missed sound effects or missed speech bubbles, that's bad. It's real bad. And then you can publish it and everyone gets to read it. Yay! All right, and I know I've got 9 minutes left, so I'm going to kind of speed run this so that I can hopefully have some questions at the end if people have them. All right, so if you want this job too, because I'll admit it's kind of a nice gig. I have a 3-year-old son and my husband's in the military, so my schedule has to be super flexible at all times. So jobs like this are very nice for me to have, and I imagine lots of people may also feel the same way. It's like the best benefit of this job. My general advice for all job types, I'm going to go into some specifics momentarily. Do not ever upload scanlations to the internet. As a translator, when you're applying for jobs, you can do your own personal scanlations, similar to some of the ones I showed earlier, as a proof of work, like a portfolio, so to speak. That's fine. But if they take that image and they reverse image search it and they find it on a scanlation website, you're blacklisted. You're done. And if you are ever discovered at any point while working for a company to be uploading scanlations, especially of that company's work, if you're uploading the typeset versions before they're published, yeah, you're absolutely blacklisted forever. So never touch a scanlation ever if you want to work in this industry. You also should have some relevant experience under your belt. I think a lot of people think it's easier to it's not hard to get started in this industry, but it's also not walking off the street get started in this industry, right? So as a translator, you want to have translated at least something before. I walked in with a mostly tourism and business portfolio. I'd never translated manga in my life, and I still got hired because I had translation experience. Typesetters, you probably want some graphic design, digital drawing, something like that to prove you know what a Photoshop is. And proofreading, maybe you want some writing samples to prove that you have natural English and you know what you're looking for. Pretty much every company will have you take a test anyway, but you want to send in some sort of work sample when you apply. My advice for translators is know your translation speed. Like I said, you need to know how many pages you can do per hour so you know what rates are acceptable for you, and also because your client is probably going to ask. The best way to do this is probably pick 2 chapters, probably start with chapter 1 or chapter 2 of any series, and then just set a timer and say, okay, I started translating at 9 a.m. All right, it is now 10:30 a.m. and I've translated 24 pages. What's my hourly rate? And kind of go with that and let that guide your payment decisions, what payment rates you think are acceptable. Look up info on creative writing. My entire life I was told that I should never creative write because I'm an academic, and so that's what I did. And now I have to write creative stories of people yelling at each other all the time, and it's kind of rough, and that's why I have to keep calling out to my proofreader to please help me. I can recommend any number of things on Skillshare, Udemy, anything like that, just to get some more experience creative writing. You want to read a lot of official manga translations, not necessarily scanlations. You won't understand how bad some scanlations are until you compare it to the actual version. But that way you get kind of an idea of what flow is, what are some normal sound effects that get used, anything. I never actually read sound effects whenever I read manga. They just always floated to the background. And now I have to actually care, and it's really difficult. So I actually really like now reading official translations so I can be like, oh, that's what you did for that. I love it. I'm going to keep that in mind. And then also I'd recommend, I know the JLPT, lots of people don't like it because it's not a test of your speaking ability, it costs money, et cetera, et cetera. I get it, I hear you. But at the very least, improve your grammar, because that's the #1 thing that I think slows people down in translation, is having to parse out weird, contracted, casual Japanese grammar. All right, for proofreaders, obviously you want to get good at grammar. This one's probably the easiest one to get started in, because if you're a native English speaker, you know from experience what it should sound like, right? You may need some practice articulating that to another person. You can't just go, well, 'cause. You've got to actually come up with a reason that you want to tell someone why they should make that change. You're also going to want to read your style guide like 5,000 times over, because we're kind of counting on you to know if that should be a hyphen or an ellipses. And so you need to really know the style guide in order to be able to move fast enough, especially because proofreading pays the least out of all 3 of these jobs. So you want to be able to move quickly. And the only way to be able to move quickly is to know your style guide pretty much back and front. For typesetters, maybe after the panel ends, because I've got like 4 minutes, I would let you give more advice. Yes, I would recommend practice on some manga pages first. I've had lots of friends think about getting into it, and then they actually do it and find out how much clone stamp tool is involved and how much redrawing of patterns is involved. and they think it's tedious and they don't want to do it. I'm not saying you shouldn't because holy crap, we need you, but I would also admit it's not for me either. So before you go and apply and promise to do 200 pages of this every month, maybe make sure you like it first. I would say practice in whatever software you're comfortable with. Even if the industry standard's Photoshop, don't feel like you've got to go and throw Adobe $500. Just use Procreate or whatever and get some practice in. There's also some YouTubers you can watch for advice. Like I've seen some good playlists from someone called Luis Palacio. You may also have more resources for learning. Ask you after the panel if you want some advice on how to learn. But they'll have some advice for good things like how to redraw, how to reinsert patterns, how to deal with color manga specifically, because oh my god, gradients. Gradients alone are what made me not want to do it. Where to apply? I'm going to quickly go through this. Feel free to take a picture of this if you want. I would strongly recommend it because I've got 3 minutes. I know I can't stay here for long. Amimaru is the first on the list. You've heard us mention it now a couple times. They pay one of the lowest rates that I've generally seen, but they are the most willing to work with newcomers, and they are very happy to train you up and teach you what you need to know, and they're very patient for the most part. In my experience, other people may feel differently. They hire translators, proofreaders, and typesetters pretty much all the time. You just email HR at Amimaru. I think my first email to them was like 2 sentences, and they sent me a test, and it was all good from there. Viz is also kind of constantly hiring translators and typesetters. They'll want you to have at least 10 pages in your portfolio for both jobs, and you're probably going to want to have some experience under your belt because obviously their standards are going to be a little bit higher. Oh, and they require InDesign, you are correct. I've listed a couple of others on here who are currently hiring with, some of them are just doing proofreaders if that looks like an interesting job to you, so definitely take a picture of that if you want. All right, I have like 2 minutes left, but then I can stick around after for some questions. Any questions immediately right now? If not, I'll let you give any typesetting advice you have for 1 minute. Yes. I generally don't get to post because I'm too terrified of breaking, non-disclosure. Right. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the panel so that panel staff doesn't get too mad at me. I'll hang outside for a couple minutes if you've got any questions, but thank you so much for coming. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. If you want to see me have a panic attack on stage, I'll be interpreting for Ayami, the VTuber, Friday and Saturday. If you want to see me panic about interpreting, come have fun, watch me sweat.